My sister Madison looked me dead in the eye across the white tablecloth at Le Bernardine and said, "Face it, Tiffany, you're broke. You've always been broke, and you always will be." The entire table went silent. Our parents, our cousins, even the waiter froze mid-pour. What she didn't know was that I had just transferred $50 million into my checking account that morning. What I didn't know was that in exactly 43 minutes, my Black Card would decline on a $700 dinner bill, and my entire world would come crashing down. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole mess started 3 weeks earlier when I got the call that changed everything. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment in Queens, eating ramen for the 4th night in a row, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Tiffany Rodriguez?" The voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of a Boston accent. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Jonathan Whitfield from Pemberton, Hartwell & Associates. We're a law firm specializing in estate settlements. I'm calling regarding your great-aunt Vivian Blackwood." I nearly choked on my noodles. Aunt Vivian! I hadn't thought about her in years. She was my grandmother's sister, this mysterious woman who lived in some mansion up in Connecticut. Family legend said she was loaded, but she'd always been a ghost to us. Never came to family gatherings, never sent birthday cards, nothing. "What about her?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but not daring to believe it. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to inform you that your great-aunt passed away 6 weeks ago. However, I'm calling with rather unusual news. You've been named as the sole beneficiary of her estate." The ramen fell from my chopsticks back into the bowl with a splash. "I'm sorry, what?" "The estate is valued at approximately $52 million. There are some properties, investments, and a rather substantial liquid assets portfolio. We'll need you to come in to sign some paperwork, but the inheritance is yours." I sat there in stunned silence, listening to him explain legal procedures and tax implications, but all I could think about was Madison. My sister Madison, who worked at Goldman Sachs and never let me forget it. Madison, who drove a BMW and lived in a Manhattan high-rise. Madison, who looked at me like I was some kind of charity case every time we met for family dinners. For 28 years, I'd been the family disappointment. I'd dropped out of NYU after 2 years because I couldn't afford it. I'd bounced between retail jobs and server positions, never quite getting ahead. Meanwhile, Madison had graduated summa cum laude, landed her dream job, and basically became the golden child overnight. At every family gathering, every birthday party, every holiday dinner, Madison would find subtle ways to remind everyone of our different stations in life. "Oh, Tiffany's still figuring things out," she'd say with that patronizing smile. "Not everyone can be driven like us, right?" Then she'd launch into some story about her latest promotion or her new apartment or her vacation to the Hamptons. The worst part was how our parents ate it up. Mom and Dad would beam at Madison like she'd cured cancer, while I sat there picking at my food, feeling smaller and smaller with every accomplishment she shared. But now everything was different. Now I had more money than Madison would see in 10 lifetimes. The next week was a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and bank visits. Jonathan Whitfield turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from a high-end estate attorney. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with an office that probably cost more to furnish than most people's houses. He walked me through everything with the patience of someone who dealt with overwhelmed heirs on a regular basis. "Your great-aunt was quite the investor," he explained, sliding thick folders across his mahogany desk. "She had holdings in tech companies, real estate ventures, even some early cryptocurrency investments that paid off handsomely. She lived modestly, never touched the principal, just kept reinvesting the returns. The properties alone were mind-boggling. The Connecticut mansion, a beach house in the Hamptons, a condo in Miami, and somehow a vineyard in Napa Valley. But it was the liquid assets that really got to me. Checking and savings accounts that, when combined, totaled just over $50 million.
Now, there are tax implications we'll need to discuss, Jonathan continued, but the bottom line is this. You're looking at roughly $37 million after federal and state taxes. Still a considerable sum. $37 million. I kept repeating the number in my head, but it felt surreal, like Monopoly money. The strangest part was how normal everything felt afterward. I went back to my studio apartment, back to my job at the vintage clothing store in Brooklyn, back to my regular life. The only difference was the new bank statements I kept hidden in my desk drawer, showing balances that looked like phone numbers. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends, and definitely not Madison. There was something delicious about keeping this secret, knowing that while she was busy flaunting her six-figure salary, I was sitting on more money than she could comprehend. But secrets have a way of weighing on you, and after 2 weeks of living this double life, I started to crack. I'd catch myself almost slipping during conversations, having to bite my tongue when Madison would make little digs about my financial situation. The breaking point came when she called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was folding vintage band t-shirts at work.
Hey, Tiff. So, Mom's birthday is coming up, and I was thinking we should do something nice for her. Like, really nice. I found this restaurant in the city, Le Bernardin. It's pretty upscale, but I figure for Mom's 60th, we should splurge. I knew Le Bernardin. It was one of those places where dinner for 6 people could easily hit $1,000. Madison knew I couldn't afford it, which was exactly why she'd suggested it. I don't know, Madison. That sounds pretty expensive. Oh, come on. It's Mom's birthday. I can cover your portion if you're worried about it. The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. I know things are tight for you right now. Things are tight, right. Like I wasn't sitting on enough money to buy the entire restaurant chain. Actually, I said, feeling a surge of reckless confidence, I think I can handle it. Count me in. Really? Are you sure? Because I don't want you stressing about rent money or anything. Madison, I said I can handle it. There was a pause on the other end. Okay, if you're sure. I'll make the reservation for Saturday at 8. The whole family. Mom, Dad, us, and I invited Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia with the twins. After I hung up, I realized what I'd just committed to. A dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in New York City with my entire extended family while sitting on a secret fortune that would make everyone's jaw drop. But maybe it was time for some jaws to drop. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent the afternoon getting ready, and for the first time in years, I didn't worry about the cost. I got my hair done at an actual salon instead of cutting it myself. I bought a new dress, not from a thrift store, but from Nordstrom. I even splurged on a taxi instead of taking the subway. When I walked into Le Bernardin, I felt different. Confidence, like I finally belonged somewhere fancy for once in my life. The family was already seated at a large round table near the window. Mom looked beautiful in a navy blue dress that Dad had probably picked out. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia were there with their teenage twins, Connor and Chloe, who looked about as thrilled to be at a fancy dinner as most 16-year-olds would be. And then there was Madison, holding court at the head of the table in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to matter to me. She looked up when I approached, and I caught just a flicker of surprise in her eyes when she saw how I looked. "Wow, Tiffany, you look different," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was meant as a compliment or not. "Thanks. Happy birthday, Mom." I leaned over to kiss our mother's cheek and took the empty seat between Connor and Dad. The first hour went smoothly enough. We ordered drinks, talked about work and family gossip, and made toasts to Mom. I found myself relaxing, actually enjoying the evening. The food was incredible, the wine was flowing, and for once, I didn't feel like the family charity case. But then Madison started up with her usual routine. "So, Tiffany, how are things at the thrift store?" she asked, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Still enjoying the retail life?" "It's a vintage clothing store, and yeah, it's fine." I took a sip of my wine, determined not to let her get under my skin. "That's great. I mean, not everyone needs to be ambitious, right? Someone has to work those kinds of jobs." She turned to Uncle Robert. "I just got another promotion at Goldman. Senior Vice President now, the youngest in my division, actually." Here we go. The Madison show was officially underway.
That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom said, beaming with pride. Isn't that wonderful, Tiffany? Yeah, it's great, I managed, stabbing at my salmon a little harder than necessary. Madison wasn't done. The salary bump is pretty nice, too. I'm thinking about upgrading my apartment again. Maybe something with a terrace this time. You know how it is when you're moving up in the world.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The table murmured appreciatively. Dad asked about her investment portfolio. Aunt Patricia wanted to know if she was seeing anyone. Madison basked in the attention like a cat in a sunbeam. "What about you, Tiff?" Connor suddenly asked. "What's your plan, like career-wise?" The table went quiet. I felt everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my answer. Madison leaned back in her chair with a smug little smile, clearly enjoying watching me squirm. "I'm figuring it out," I said quietly. "She's always figuring it out," Madison said with a laugh that wasn't entirely kind. "That's Tiffany's thing, the eternal figuring out phase." Something hot and angry flared up in my chest, but I pushed it down. Not here, not at Mom's birthday dinner. But Madison wasn't finished. "I mean, I get it. Not everyone can handle the pressure of a real career. Some people are just more suited to simpler things." She gestured vaguely in my direction. "And that's okay. The world needs retail workers and service people. It's honest work." The condescension was so thick, I could practically taste it. Honest work, like she was patting me on the head for being a good little peasant. "Madison," Dad said quietly, a warning in his voice. "What? I'm being supportive. I'm just saying that Tiffany shouldn't feel bad about her choices. Money isn't everything, right?" She leaned forward, and her voice took on that fake, sincere tone that made my skin crawl. "I mean, sure, I could probably pay for this entire dinner without thinking twice about it, but that doesn't make me better than anyone else." And there it was, the not-so-subtle reminder that she was picking up the check, that we were all here because of her generosity, that I was too broke to afford my own meal at a place like this. "Face it, Tiffany," she said, her smile sharp as a blade. "You're broke. You've always been broke, and you always will be." The words hit me like a physical blow. The entire table went dead silent. Mom looked mortified. Dad was staring down at his plate. Uncle Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even the twins looked up from their phones. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Madison sat there with that satisfied smirk, completely unaware that she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Mom was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Dad looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I could have stayed quiet. I could have swallowed the humiliation like I'd done 100 times before. But $37 million sitting in my checking account had given me something I'd never had before: options. "You know what, Madison?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You're absolutely right." Her eyebrows shot up. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. "I am broke," I continued, reaching for my purse. "At least I was until 3 weeks ago when I inherited $52 million from Great Aunt Vivian." The effect was immediate and spectacular. Madison's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Uncle Robert choked on his bread roll. The twins both looked up from their phones at the same time, which might have been a first in recorded history. "That's not funny, Tiffany," Madison said, her voice tight. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the one I'd been obsessively checking for weeks just to make sure the numbers were real. I turned the screen toward the table. Checking account balance: $50,237,842.63. Mom gasped. Dad leaned forward so far he nearly knocked over his water glass. Madison went completely pale. That's impossible," she stammered. "Jonathan Whitfield, Pemberton, Hartwell and Associates," I said, pulling out the business card I'd been carrying around like a talisman. Apparently, Aunt Vivian was quite the investor. Who knew? The table erupted. Everyone started talking at once.
Connor was trying to do math on his phone. Chloe was asking if I was going to buy a mansion. Mom was crying happy tears. Dad kept saying, "I'll be damned," over and over. But Madison just sat there, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom finally managed to ask through her tears. "I wanted to see how long Madison could go without reminding everyone how much more successful she is than me," I said, never taking my eyes off my sister. Madison finally found her voice. You let me embarrass myself. You let me pay for dinners. You let me offer to cover your rent that one time. I never asked you to do any of those things, I pointed out. You offered because it made you feel superior. I just didn't stop you. This is incredible. Uncle Robert was practically bouncing in his seat. Vivian always was eccentric, but $50 million? Did you know she had that kind of money, Patricia? Aunt Patricia shook her head, looking dazed. I mean, we knew she was comfortable, but this is generational wealth. Generational wealth. The phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about changing everything for my family, my future kids, maybe even starting something bigger than myself. But first, I had to deal with Madison, who looked like she was having some kind of existential crisis. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why Aunt Vivian? You barely knew her." It was a fair question, and honestly, I didn't have a good answer. I don't know. Maybe she saw something in me that nobody else did. Or maybe she just wanted to mess with the family hierarchy. Either way, it happened. The waiter appeared at our table, clearly sensing the dramatic shift in energy, but professional enough not to comment. "Would anyone care for dessert this evening?" "Actually," I said, an idea forming in my head, "could we see your wine list, the premium selections?" Madison's eyes widened. "Tiffany, what are you doing?" "It's Mom's 60th birthday. I think we should celebrate properly." I smiled at the waiter. "What's the most expensive bottle of champagne you have?" "Well, we have a 1996 Dom Perignon for $850. "Perfect. Bring 2 bottles. "Tiffany," Mom protested, "that's almost $2,000 just for champagne." "Mom," I said gently, "I just inherited $50 million. I think I can handle $1,700 in champagne." The waiter scurried away, probably excited about the commission. Madison was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "This is insane," she muttered. "3 weeks ago, you were asking me if you could borrow $20 for groceries." "Things change," I said with a shrug, sometimes very quickly. When the champagne arrived, the whole production felt surreal. The waiter made a big show of presenting the bottles, popping the corks with theatrical flair, pouring the golden liquid into crystal flutes that probably cost more than most people's weekly paychecks. I raised my glass. "To Mom, who taught us that family comes first, even when family members are complete jerks to each other." I looked pointedly at Madison. "And to Great Aunt Vivian, who apparently had a sense of humor about inheritance distribution." We all clinked glasses, but the atmosphere was still tense. Madison was drinking her champagne mechanically, like she wasn't really tasting it. "So what are you going to do?" Dad asked. "With the money, I mean." It was the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. I honestly don't know yet. I'm still processing it all. I met with a financial advisor last week who nearly fainted when I showed him the portfolio. Apparently, Aunt Vivian's investment strategy was borderline genius, according to him. "You should quit that job," Chloe said suddenly. "If I had $50 million, I'd never work again." "That's exactly why you don't have $50 million, her mother said with a laugh. "Actually, I like my job," I said, surprising myself by meaning it. "Maria, my boss, she's been really good to me. And there's something to be said for having structure in your life, even when you don't technically need it." Madison snorted. "Structure? Right. You're going to keep folding vintage t-shirts when you could buy the entire building." There was still venom in her voice, but it sounded different now, less confident, more desperate. "Maybe I will buy the building," I said thoughtfully. "Maria's always talking about wanting to expand but not being able to afford the rent increases. Maybe I could help with that." You could help with a lot of things, Uncle Robert pointed out. $50 million could change a lot of lives. He wasn't wrong. I'd been so focused on the immediate shock of having money that I hadn't really thought about the responsibility that came with it. What do you do when you suddenly have the power to solve problems, to change lives, to make a real difference? I've been thinking about that, I admitted. Maybe something with education. I never got to finish college because I couldn't afford it. Maybe there's a way to help other people who are in the same situation. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Mom said, fresh tears starting up. Vivian would be so proud. Madison was quiet through all of this, just drinking her champagne and staring off into space. Finally, she looked at me. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. The table went silent again, but this time it felt different, expectant rather than uncomfortable. I've been horrible to you for years, and tonight was inexcusable. She set down her champagne flute with shaky hands. I was so wrapped up in being successful, in being the one who had her life together, that I forgot we're supposed to be sisters. It was more honest than I'd heard from Madison in years, maybe ever. I accept your apology, I said. But Madison, this doesn't change who I am. Money doesn't make me a different person. Doesn't it, though? She asked. I mean, look at you right now. You're confident, you're making decisions, you're different. She had a point. I did feel different. Not just because of the money, but because for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had agency, like my choices mattered. Maybe you're right, I admitted, but I hope I'm still the same person who would rather stay home and watch Netflix than go to some fancy charity gala. Even if you could afford to throw the charity gala? Connor asked with a grin. Especially then. The conversation continued, everyone asking questions about the inheritance, about Aunt Vivian, about what I planned to do next. The champagne loosened everyone up, and by the time we were ready to leave, even Madison seemed to be warming up to the new reality. When the check came, I reached for it without hesitation. $738.42 for dinner and champagne. 3 weeks ago, that number would have made me physically sick. Now it felt like pocket change. I handed my black card to the waiter with a casual confidence that felt foreign but good. The same card I'd gotten just days earlier from my private banker, along with a speech about exclusive benefits and concierge services that had gone completely over my head.
The waiter took it with the kind of reverence reserved for premium credit cards and disappeared toward the back of the restaurant. And that's when everything went horribly, spectacularly wrong. He came back 3 minutes later with an expression I'd never seen on a waiter's face before. Confusion mixed with embarrassment, with just a hint of panic around the edges. "I'm terribly sorry," he said quietly, leaning down so only our table could hear, "but your card has been declined." The words hit the table like a bomb going off in slow motion. I felt the blood drain from my face as every single person at the table turned to stare at me. The waiter stood there holding my black card like it had personally offended him. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to croak out. "Your card has been declined, ma'am. Would you like to try another form of payment?" Madison's face went through about 6 different expressions in 2 seconds before settling on something between confusion and vindication. "Are you serious right now?" "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Can you try running it again?" The waiter nodded politely and disappeared again. The silence at our table was deafening. Mom was clutching her purse like she was ready to pull out her own credit card. Dad was doing that thing where he stares at his hands when he's uncomfortable. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia were exchanging glances like they were watching a car accident happen in real time. "Maybe the machine's broken," Connor offered weakly. "Yeah," Chloe added, but her voice had that pitch teenagers get when they're trying to convince themselves of something they don't actually believe. Madison leaned back in her chair, and I could practically see her brain recalibrating. "So let me get this straight. You claim to have $50 million, but your credit card gets declined on a $700 dinner?"
It's a black card, I said defensively, though even as I said it, I realized how ridiculous it sounded. It has a $50 million spending limit. $50 million? Madison's eyebrows shot up. Tiffany, black cards don't have $50 million limits. The highest limit I've ever heard of is maybe $500,000, and that's for people with serious wealth and perfect credit. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? The banker said. What banker? Madison interrupted. Which bank? Meridian Private Wealth Management, I said, pulling out the business card I'd gotten when I opened the account. Samuel Henderson, my private banker, he set up everything. Madison grabbed the card from my hand and studied it with the intensity of someone who worked in finance and knew what to look for. Her frown deepened as she examined it. Tiffany, she said slowly, this looks off. The logo's slightly wrong, and I've never heard of this specific branch. Where did you say this was? Downtown, on Wall Street. But even as I said it, doubt was creeping in. Had the office seemed a little too perfect? Is the marble a little too shiny? Is the whole operation a little too smooth? The waiter returned, looking even more uncomfortable than before. I'm very sorry, but the card has been declined again. The system is showing it as invalid. Invalid. The word echoed in my head like a death knell. I need to make a phone call, I said, standing up so quickly that my chair nearly toppled backward. I'll be right back. I practically ran toward the restaurant's entrance, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. I dialed Samuel Henderson's number, the one I'd called 3 times in the past 2 weeks to ask questions about my accounts. It went straight to a disconnected number message. Panic flooded my system like ice water. I tried the main number for Meridian Private Wealth Management. Same thing, disconnected. With growing dread, I opened my banking app, the one that had been showing $50 million just an hour ago. The screen loaded, and my heart stopped. Account not found. I tried logging out and back in. Same message. I tried the backup access methods. Nothing. It was like the entire account had never existed. My legs felt like they might give out. I leaned against the wall outside Le Bernardin, trying to process what was happening. The inheritance, the lawyers, the bank accounts, had it all been fake? But Jonathan Whitfield was real. I had his card, his office address. I'd been there multiple times. I dialed his number with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. The number you have dialed is not in service. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. It had to be. I opened Google Maps and searched for Pemberton, Hartwell and Associates. The address came up, showing a building in Midtown that I recognized. I'd been there. I sat in Jonathan Whitfield's office and signed papers. But when I clicked on Street View, my blood ran cold. The building was there, but the directory showed completely different businesses. No law firm, no Pemberton, Hartwell and Associates, just a yoga studio, a dentist office, and some kind of consulting company I'd never heard of. I must have stood there for 10 minutes, frantically searching online for any trace of the law firm, the bank, anything that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. But there was nothing. It was like they'd been wiped from existence. When I finally walked back to the table on unsteady legs, 8 pairs of eyes immediately locked onto me. I could tell from their expressions that they'd been discussing the situation while I was gone. Well, Madison asked, though her tone had shifted from smug to concerned. The phone numbers are disconnected, I said quietly, sinking back into my chair. The bank, the lawyers, I can't reach anyone. The table fell silent again. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sweetheart, he said gently, is it possible that someone might have been taking advantage of you? Taking advantage. The euphemism hung in the air like a toxic cloud. You think I was scammed, I said. It wasn't a question. Honey, Mom reached across the table to take my hand. These things happen to smart people all the time. These criminals, they're very sophisticated. Criminals? Scammed? The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's story. But I saw the money. I protested weakly. It was in my account. I checked it every day. Fake websites, Madison said, and her voice was surprisingly gentle. It's actually not that hard to create a convincing banking interface. I've seen it in fraud cases at work. They can make it look completely legitimate.
Uncle Robert nodded grimly. I had a client a few years ago who thought he'd won the Irish lottery, sent them thousands of dollars in processing fees before he realized it was a scam. They had official-looking documents, phone numbers, and the works. The reality was crashing down on me like a building collapse. Everything, the inheritance, the money, the newfound confidence, the champagne, the moment of triumph over Madison, all of it had been built on lies. So, I'm actually broke, I said, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. Probably broker than when you started, Madison said quietly. These scams usually involve the victim sending money somewhere. Did you transfer anything to them? My heart sank even further, which I hadn't thought was possible. Processing fees for the inheritance, $28,000. It was everything I'd managed to save working double shifts for the past 2 years, plus money I'd borrowed against my credit cards. Mom made a small sound of distress. Dad closed his eyes like he was in physical pain. 28,000, Madison repeated. Jesus, Tiffany. The waiter appeared at my elbow again, clearly at the end of his patience. Ma'am, we do need to settle the bill this evening. I stared at him blankly. $738. I didn't have $700. I didn't have $70. After the processing fees and the new clothes and the hair appointment and the taxi rides, I had maybe $43 to my name. I'll get it, Madison said quietly, reaching for her purse. No. The word came out harder than I intended. No, Madison, I can't let you pay for this, not after everything I said tonight. Tiffany, you don't have a choice. Unless you want to wash dishes in the kitchen, someone needs to pay this bill. She was right, of course, but the humiliation was overwhelming. An hour ago, I'd been the mysterious heiress buying $1,000 champagne. Now I was back to being exactly what Madison had called me. Broke. Worse than broke, actually. I was broke, in debt, and apparently stupid enough to fall for an elaborate con that had cost me everything. Madison handed her card to the waiter without another word. The transaction went through smoothly, efficiently, the way transactions do when you actually have money. Thank you, I whispered. Don't, she said. Just don't. The ride home was torture. Mom and Dad offered to let me move back in with them, temporarily. Uncle Robert mentioned knowing someone who worked in fraud investigation. Aunt Patricia kept saying how sorry she was, like someone had died. Madison drove me back to Queens in silence. When she pulled up outside my building, my tiny, cramped building that I'd been so ready to leave behind, she finally spoke. Are you going to be okay? I almost laughed. Okay? I just lost my life savings to criminals, humiliated myself in front of my entire family, and discovered that the past 3 weeks of my life had been based on a complete fantasy. I have no idea, I said honestly. We should call the police, file a report. With what evidence? Some business cards and a fake website that probably doesn't exist anymore? Madison was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry I called you broke, she said finally. Turns out you were right. I was cruel. There's a difference. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time all evening. She looked tired, sad even. Why did you pay for dinner? I asked. She shrugged. Because you're my sister. And she trailed off, staring out the windshield. Because I've been horrible to you, and maybe this was the universe's way of reminding me what actually matters. I got out of the car without saying anything else. What was there to say? That I appreciated the gesture? That I was sorry for lying to everyone? That I felt like the world's biggest fool? As Madison drove away, I stood on the sidewalk looking up at my building. Same cracked concrete steps, same broken light in the lobby, same tiny apartment waiting for me upstairs, where I'd have to figure out how to rebuild my life from scratch.
But as I climbed those stairs, something occurred to me. Something that made my stomach drop even further than it already had. If the inheritance was fake, if the lawyers were fake, if everything was fake, then how had they known to target me specifically? How had they known about Great Aunt Vivian in the first place? That question haunted me all night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd had with Jonathan Whitfield, trying to remember exactly what he'd said about how he'd found me. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. He'd known my full name, my address, even my phone number. But more than that, he'd known about Great Aunt Vivian. He'd known she was my grandmother's sister, knew she lived in Connecticut, knew enough family details to make the whole story believable. How does a scammer get that kind of information? By 7 in the morning, I'd given up on sleep entirely. I made coffee with the last decent grounds I had left and sat down at my laptop to do what I should have done 3 weeks ago: research Great Aunt Vivian myself. What I found was disturbing. Vivian Blackwood had existed, all right. There were obituaries, property records, even a small mention in a Connecticut newspaper about her passing. But according to every official document I could find, she'd died intestate, without a will. Her modest estate had been handled by the state and donated to charity. Modest estate. Not $50 million. More like 50,000, mostly tied up in her small house and some basic savings accounts. So Jonathan Whitfield had used a real person, a real death, but fabricated everything else around it. The question was still how he'd connected Vivian to me in the first place. I spent the next 3 hours diving down internet rabbit holes, searching through genealogy sites, family tree databases, anything that might explain the connection. And that's when I found it. A family tree on Ancestry.com. Someone had uploaded a detailed Rodriguez family genealogy that went back 4 generations. It listed my parents, my sister, me, and yes, Great Aunt Vivian as my grandmother's sister. The family tree had been created by someone named Family History 2019. I clicked on the profile, but it was essentially blank. No photo, minimal information, just the username and the date the account was created, March 15th, 2024. Less than a year ago, right around the time someone would have been planning this scam. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone and called Madison. She answered on the second ring, sounding like she'd been awake for hours.
"How are you holding up?" she asked before I could even say hello. "Madison, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." There was a pause. "Okay, what is it?" "Have you ever looked into our family genealogy? Ever created a family tree online or anything like that?" "No, why would I?" "Wait, actually, yeah, last year sometime. I was going through Mom's old photos after Grandma died, and I got curious about the family history. I think I made an account on one of those Ancestry websites." My heart stopped. "Which website?" "I don't remember. Ancestry.com, maybe? I uploaded some family information, photos, that kind of thing." "Why?" "Madison, I think that's how they found me. Someone accessed your family tree and used it to target me for the scam." The silence on the other end stretched for a long moment. When Madison spoke again, her voice was different, harder. "Are you saying this is my fault?" "No, I'm saying someone used information you uploaded to what? To make you look like an idiot? Because that part you managed all on your own." The words hit like a slap. "Madison, I'm trying to figure out how this happened so maybe we can catch these people." "These people are probably in another country by now, Tiffany. Your money is gone. And honestly, if you'd bothered to do 5 minutes of research instead of immediately believing you were some secret heiress, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation." I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it like it had betrayed me. This was Madison's response? Victim blaming? "You know what?" I said, my voice getting louder. "You're right. It is my fault. I was stupid enough to believe that maybe, just once in my life, something good would happen to me. I was stupid enough to think I could finally be on equal footing with my perfect sister, who never misses an opportunity to remind me how much better she is than me. That's not. And I was really stupid to think that after you paid for dinner last night, maybe you'd actually learn something about being a decent human being. But here you are, 12 hours later, back to kicking me when I'm down. I hung up before she could respond. The anger felt good for about 30 seconds. Then it faded, leaving me feeling even more alone than before. I was broke, I'd been scammed, and now I'd probably ruined the one relationship in my family that had actually seemed to be improving. But I wasn't ready to give up on finding answers. I spent the rest of the morning calling every authority I could think of: the FBI's Internet Fraud Department, the FTC, even the local police. The responses were all variations of the same theme. Without more concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The scammers had been smart, covering their tracks well. The police detective I spoke with was sympathetic, but realistic. "Ma'am, these operations are usually run from overseas. Even if we could track them down, which is unlikely, recovering the money is almost impossible. Your best bet is to file a report with the IC3, that's the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, and hope they can identify a pattern if other people report similar scams." Other people. The thought hit me like lightning. If they'd targeted me based on information from a genealogy website, I probably wasn't their only victim. There had to be others. I went back to Ancestry.com and started searching for other family trees that looked suspiciously detailed, created by accounts with minimal information. It took hours, but I found them. Dozens of family trees, all created by anonymous accounts, all uploaded within the past year. The Johnson family of Ohio, the Chen family in California, the Williams family in Texas, all detailed, all complete, all created by blank profiles. I started reaching out to people listed in these family trees, sending messages through the platform explaining what had happened to me. Most didn't respond, but a few did. Sarah Johnson from Columbus wrote back within an hour. "Oh my God, yes! I got a call about inheriting money from a great uncle I barely remembered. I almost sent them money for processing fees, but my husband topped me out of it. We reported it to the police but never heard anything back." David Chen from San Francisco. "My elderly mother got one of these calls. She sent them $8,000 before we found out what was happening. We tried to get the bank to reverse the transfer, but it was too late." The pattern was becoming clear. The scammers were systematically mining genealogy websites for family information, then targeting people with stories about inheritances from distant relatives. They weren't just random criminals, they were running a sophisticated operation. By evening, I'd identified at least 15 potential victims and collected enough information to put together a comprehensive report. I called the FBI again, this time armed with evidence of a broader criminal enterprise. Special Agent Maria Santos at the Cybercrime Division sounded much more interested than the local police had been. "Ms. Rodriguez, what you've uncovered could be extremely valuable. This appears to be a coordinated fraud ring targeting genealogy website users. We've seen similar operations, but never with this level of detail about the victim selection process." "Can you catch them?" I asked. "I can't make any promises, but yes, this gives us a much better chance. Can you send me everything you've compiled? Email addresses, phone numbers, the genealogy accounts, victim statements?" "Of course. But Agent Santos, what about the money? Is there any chance of getting it back?" There was a pause. "I'll be honest with you. In most cases like this, the money is moved through multiple accounts and converted to cryptocurrency within hours. Recovery is rare. But if we can shut down the operation, we might be able to prevent them from victimizing others." It wasn't the answer I hoped for, but it was something. At least my stupidity might serve some purpose if it helped catch these people. After I sent the information to Agent Santos, I sat back in my chair and took stock of my situation. I was still broke, I was still in debt, I still had to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing. But for the first time since the card had been declined, I felt like I'd accomplished something. Maybe I couldn't get my money back, but I'd turned my personal disaster into something that might help other people. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Madison, I was wrong to blame you. You didn't deserve that. Can we talk?"
I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Tomorrow, I need some time.
I understand. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you for investigating this. That took guts. Proud of me? When was the last time Madison had said that? I made myself some ramen, the cheap kind that I'd gotten way too familiar with over the years, and settled down to watch Netflix on my laptop. Same tiny apartment, same cracked walls, same life I'd been living before this whole mess started. But something felt different. Maybe it was knowing that I'd fought back against the people who'd taken advantage of me. Maybe it was the possibility that Madison and I might actually be able to have a real relationship for once. Or maybe it was just that surviving the worst humiliation of my life had shown me I was tougher than I'd given myself credit for. My phone rang. Unknown number. For a second, my heart jumped. What if it was Jonathan Whitfield calling back, ready to confess and return my money? But the voice on the other end was different. Younger, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Is this Tiffany Rodriguez? Yes, who is this? My name is Alex Thompson. I saw your message on the Ancestry website about the inheritance scam. I think I might know who's behind it. I sat up straight. What do you mean? I used to work for a company that did data harvesting from social media and genealogy sites. We sold the information to marketing companies, mostly, but I found out some of our clients were using it for other purposes. I quit when I realized what was happening, but I kept copies of some files with your name in them. My hands were shaking again. Are you serious? Dead serious. If you're willing to meet in person, I can show you everything I have. Names, addresses, bank accounts, the whole operation. But we need to be careful. These people don't like loose ends. I looked around my tiny apartment, thinking about my $43, my ruined credit, my humiliating evening at Le Bernardin. Then I thought about David Chen's elderly mother losing $8,000 and all the other victims who might be getting calls right now. Where do you want to meet? Alex Thompson suggested we meet at a 24-hour diner in Brooklyn called Murphy's. Public place, lots of witnesses, multiple exit routes, he explained over the phone. Trust me, with these people, paranoia is a survival skill. I arrived 30 minutes early and chose a booth near the back where I could watch the entrance. The diner had that timeless quality of greasy spoons everywhere, cracked vinyl seats, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick, and coffee that could strip paint. Perfect for a clandestine meeting with a mysterious informant. Alex turned out to be nothing like I'd imagined. I'd been expecting some shadowy figure in a trench coat, but the guy who slid into the booth across from me looked like he'd stepped out of a tech startup commercial. Early 30s, flannel shirt, thick-rimmed glasses, and a laptop bag that probably cost more than my rent. Tiffany? He asked, though I was the only person sitting alone in the back section. That's me. You're Alex? He nodded and immediately started scanning the diner like he expected armed men to burst through the windows. Sorry about the cloak and dagger stuff. When you've seen what I've seen, you get a little jumpy. What exactly have you seen? Alex pulled out his laptop and angled the screen so only I could see it. Remember how I said I used to work for a data harvesting company? Well, that was putting it mildly. The company was called Nexus Analytics, and on paper, we provided market research services to businesses. He opened a folder filled with documents that looked official and intimidating. But about 6 months into the job, I started noticing some weird patterns in our client requests. People wanting very specific family tree information, genealogy data, even social media posts about family members who died recently. My stomach dropped. They were looking for targets? Exactly. But it gets worse. He clicked to another folder. I started digging deeper, following the money trail. Our biggest client wasn't a marketing company at all. It was a shell corporation called Heritage Financial Solutions, which was owned by another shell company, which was owned by another one, and so on. Russian nesting dolls made of crime, I muttered. Pretty much. But I finally traced it back to the source. He pulled up a document that made my blood run cold.
It was a spreadsheet with hundreds of names, addresses, and detailed family information. My name was highlighted in yellow, along with notes about Great Aunt Vivian's death and my vulnerable financial situation. They had a whole profile on me, I said, reading over the notes. It says here that I work retail, live alone, have student loan debt, and, quote, exhibit signs of financial stress based on social media activity. They didn't just pick you randomly, Tiffany. You were specifically selected because their algorithm determined you were the perfect mark. Desperate enough to believe in a windfall, isolated enough that you wouldn't immediately seek outside advice, and financially naive enough to fall for their story. The clinical nature of it was almost worse than the scam itself. I wasn't a person to them. I was a data point that checked all the right boxes for victimization. Who's behind Heritage Financial Solutions? I asked. Alex hesitated. That's where things get dangerous. The operation is run by a guy named Viktor Kozlov. Russian-American, has legitimate businesses that serve as friends, but makes most of his money through sophisticated fraud schemes. The inheritance scam is just one of many. Do you have proof of this? I have everything: financial records, client communications, even recordings of planning meetings. He patted his laptop bag. When I realized what was happening, I copied as much as I could before I quit. I've been sitting on it for months, trying to figure out what to do. Why didn't you go to the FBI? Because 3 other people who tried to expose Kozlov ended up in very bad situations. One had his house burned down. Another got beaten so badly he spent 2 months in the hospital. The third one just disappeared. My mouth went dry. And you think meeting with me is safe? Safer than doing nothing. Look, Kozlov's operation is getting bigger and more brazen. Your case isn't unique. They're running dozens of these inheritance scams simultaneously. But your investigation caught their attention. What do you mean? Alex pulled up an email thread that made my hands start shaking. The subject line read, "Rodriguez problem, requires immediate attention." They know you've been contacting other victims. They know you talked to the FBI, and they're not happy about it. He scrolled down to show me the most recent message, sent just 2 hours ago. They're planning to discredit you before you can cause more damage. Discredit me how? False criminal charges, manufactured evidence that you were involved in the scam yourself, maybe some planted drugs in your apartment, followed by an anonymous tip to the police. These people are professional, Tiffany. When they want someone silenced, they have a lot of options.
I felt sick. Not only had I lost my money, but now I was apparently a target for retaliation by criminals who had the resources to destroy my life completely. What do we do? I asked. We go to the FBI together, not just with your evidence, but with everything I've collected. Names, bank accounts, the whole organizational structure. It's enough to bring down the entire operation, but only if we move fast. And if they come after us? They might. But if we can get Kozlov and his top people arrested quickly enough, the rest of the organization will probably scatter. Honor among thieves only goes so far. I thought about Agent Santos and her promise to investigate. I already have a contact at the FBI, Agent Maria Santos in the Cybercrime Division. Alex nodded approvingly. Good. Santos has a reputation for being thorough and aggressive with financial crimes. If anyone can move quickly on this, it's her. So we call her now? Actually, I think we should meet with her in person. What I have is too sensitive to discuss over the phone. He started packing up his laptop. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. If they're planning to plant evidence at your apartment, you don't want to be there when it happens. The practical implications of what he was saying hit me like a truck. I can't just abandon my apartment. All my stuff is there. Your stuff won't matter if you're in jail on false charges. Or worse. He had a point. But where was I supposed to go? I couldn't ask my parents to harbor a fugitive, and things with Madison were still tense. As if reading my mind, Alex said, I have a safe house. Well, it's actually just my friend's apartment, but he's out of town for a month, and it's not connected to either of us officially. You can stay there until we figure out our next move.
You're asking me to trust you completely based on a conversation in a diner? I know how it sounds. But Tiffany, I've been watching this operation destroy people's lives for months. I quit my job, I've been living in fear, I've been carrying around evidence that could put dangerous people in prison, all because I couldn't stand by and watch innocent people get hurt. He leaned forward, and his voice got intense. You're the first victim who fought back. You're the first person who might actually be able to help me stop them. So yeah, I'm asking you to trust me, because right now, I might be the only person who can keep you safe. I looked around the diner. An elderly man was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. A young couple was sharing a plate of fries. A waitress was refilling sugar dispensers. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that 2 tables away, someone was deciding whether to trust a stranger with her life. Okay, I said finally, but I want to call Agent Santos first. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Alex smiled for the first time since he'd sat down. Deal. But we'll call her from the safe house. And Tiffany, turn off your phone now. If they're tracking you, we don't want to lead them to where we're going. I powered down my phone and followed Alex out of the diner into the Brooklyn night. As we walked to his car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every parked car could contain someone waiting to follow us. Is this what paranoia feels like? I asked as Alex unlocked a beat-up Honda Civic. No, he said grimly. This is what being hunted feels like. Paranoia is when you think people are after you for no reason. We have very good reasons. The safe house turned out to be a studio apartment in Queens, about 20 minutes from my own place. It was sparse but clean, with basic furniture and a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. My friend Derek is a travel photographer, Alex explained, as he checked the locks on the door. He's covering some story in Southeast Asia for next month. As far as anyone knows, this place is empty. I sat down on the couch and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 6 hours. This morning, I'd been a scam victim, trying to figure out how I'd been targeted. Now, I was apparently hiding from dangerous criminals in a stranger's apartment. Are you sure Agent Santos will take this seriously? Alex was setting up his laptop on the kitchen table. Once she sees what I have, she won't have a choice. This isn't just about inheritance scams anymore. Kozlov's operation includes identity theft, credit card fraud, money laundering, and probably human trafficking. It's a full-scale criminal enterprise. Human trafficking? Some of the people who work for him aren't exactly there voluntarily. Immigrants who got in debt to the wrong people, vulnerable individuals who got in too deep and couldn't get out. It's uglier than just financial crimes. The scope of what we were dealing with was becoming clearer and more terrifying. This wasn't just about getting my $28,000 back. We were talking about dismantling a major criminal organization. Alex, I said, what if we fail? What if they're too powerful or too well connected, or we just can't prove everything we need to prove? He looked up from his laptop, and his expression was serious but determined. Then a lot of innocent people are going to keep getting hurt. But Tiffany, we're not going to fail. I've been preparing for this moment for months. I have everything we need to bury these people. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Let's call Agent Santos. Agent Santos answered on the first ring, even though it was past 10 p.m. Rodriguez, I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Agent Santos, I need to meet with you immediately. I have someone with me who has evidence about the entire criminal operation behind my case. There was a pause. What kind of evidence? I looked at Alex, who nodded and gestured for me to put the call on speaker. Financial records, organizational charts, client communications, recorded meetings, everything you'd need to take down the whole network. And you are? Alex Thompson. I used to work for the data harvesting company that provided target information to the scammers. I've been collecting evidence for months. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Thompson, are you currently in a safe location? We think so. Why? Because an hour ago, NYPD got an anonymous tip about drug activity at Miss Rodriguez's apartment. When they arrived to investigate, they found a substantial amount of cocaine planted in her bedroom. There's currently a warrant out for her arrest. My legs gave out. I collapsed on Derek's couch, feeling like the world was spinning around me. They actually did it. They planted drugs in my apartment. That's not all, Agent Santos continued. We've also received information suggesting that Miss Rodriguez may have been involved in the inheritance scam from the beginning, that she was working with the criminals to defraud her own family. That's insane, I protested. They're trying to frame me.
I believe you, which is why I need you to come in immediately, before this gets any worse. Where are you? Alex grabbed my arm and shook his head vigorously. He mouthed, "Don't tell her," and pointed to his laptop screen. He'd pulled up something that made my blood run cold. It was an FBI internal communication system, and he was logged in somehow. The screen showed a message thread about my case, with Agent Santos's name attached to several responses. But according to the timestamps, she'd been communicating about the drug plant and false evidence before it had actually happened. She was part of the operation. "Ms. Rodriguez, are you still there?" Santos asked. Alex was typing furiously on his laptop. He showed me the screen. "Don't let her know we suspect. Play along." "Yes, I'm here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're in Brooklyn. Can you meet us somewhere public?" "Actually, given the circumstances, I think it would be better if you came to the federal building. We can provide protection here, and I can expedite the process of clearing your name." "Okay," I said. "Give us an hour to get there." "Perfect. Ask for me at the front desk, and tell them you're there for Operation Heritage." She hung up, and I immediately turned to Alex. "How did you access FBI communications?" "I still have login credentials from my old job. Nexif Analytics had contracts with several government agencies." His face was grim. "Tiffany, Agent Santos isn't trying to help you. She's been feeding information to Kozlov's organization for months. She's the one who told them you were investigating." The betrayal felt like a physical blow. The one person I'd trusted to help me was actually working for the criminals. So what do we do now? We go over her head, way over her head. Alex pulled up a new contact list. "I'm calling Agent Rachel Kim at the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. If Santos is dirty, Kim will want to know about it." The next phone call changed everything. Agent Kim was skeptical at first, but when Alex started sending her file after file of evidence, including the communications showing Santos's involvement, her tone shifted dramatically. "Mr. Thompson, this is extraordinary. How long have you been collecting this information?" 8 months. I've been waiting for the right moment to come forward." "And Ms. Rodriguez, you're currently wanted on drug possession charges that you claim were fabricated?" "Yes, Agent Santos told us about the plant before it was supposed to have happened. We have proof she's working with the criminals." "I'm going to need you both to come in immediately, but not to the federal building. Agent Santos can't know we're investigating her. Can you get to our field office in Newark? It's about 40 minutes from your location." Alex looked at me. "Can we trust her?" I thought about it. At this point, what choice do we have? 2 hours later, we were sitting in a sterile conference room in Newark, watching Agent Kim and her team pore over Alex's evidence. It was surreal, seeing months of criminal activity laid out on a conference table like a particularly complex jigsaw puzzle. "This is incredible work," Agent Kim said, looking up from a stack of financial records. "We've been trying to penetrate Kozlov's organization for years. What you've given us is enough to bring down the entire network." "What about Agent Santos?" I asked. "She'll be arrested tonight, along with Kozlov and 12 other members of the organization. We're coordinating with local law enforcement to hit all their locations simultaneously." "And the charges against me?" "Will be dropped immediately. We have more than enough evidence to prove the drugs were planted. In fact, Ms. Rodriguez, your investigation into this case helped us identify corruption within our own ranks. The Bureau owes you a debt of gratitude." At midnight, we watched from the FBI field office as news reports started coming in about the arrests. Victor Kozlov, picked up at his estate in New Jersey. Agent Santos, arrested at her home in Connecticut. 12 other suspects taken into custody across 3 states. The operation they called Heritage had been completely dismantled.
What happens now? I asked Agent Kim. Well, there will be trials, testimony, probably months of legal proceedings, but the important thing is that these people won't be able to hurt anyone else. And my money? Agent Kim's expression grew sympathetic. I'll be honest, we've recovered some assets, but a lot of the stolen funds were moved offshore very quickly. You might see some restitution eventually, but I can't promise how much. It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about justice and making sure no one else went through what I had. 3 weeks later, I was back at work at the vintage clothing store, folding band t-shirts and helping customers find the perfect retro jacket. It felt strange being in the same place where this whole nightmare had started, but also somehow comforting. Maria, my boss, had been incredibly understanding about everything. When the story broke in the news, local woman helps FBI bust multi-million-dollar fraud ring, she'd actually given me a raise and offered to make me assistant manager. "You're famous now," she said, laughing as she showed me the latest article about the case. "I have customers coming in just to meet the woman who took down an international crime syndicate." I was restocking the jewelry display when Madison walked in. She looked nervous, which was unusual for her. "Hey," she said, approaching the counter cautiously. "Hey yourself, what brings you to Brooklyn?" I wanted to apologize, properly this time. She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I realized something. You were braver than I've ever been." I looked up from the earrings I was organizing. "How do you figure that?" "You fought back. When the whole world was telling you that you were stupid, that you'd been scammed, that you should just accept it and move on, you kept fighting. You investigated, you found other victims, you helped catch the people responsible." Madison's voice got quieter. "I don't think I would have had the courage to do that." "You would have been too smart to fall for the scam in the first place."
Maybe, but that's not the point. The point is that when you did fall for it, you didn't just curl up and feel sorry for yourself. You turned it into something that helped other people. I set down the jewelry and really looked at my sister. "Madison, are we actually having a moment here?" She laughed. "I think we are, and I have a proposal for you." "I'm listening." "I've been thinking about starting my own financial consulting firm, something that focuses on helping people who've been victims of financial crimes or who just need guidance on protecting themselves from scams." She paused. "I'd like you to be my partner." I blinked. "Your partner? Madison, I don't know anything about finance." "But you know about being a victim. You know what it feels like to be targeted and manipulated. And you've proven you can investigate and problem solve under pressure." She leaned against the counter. "I can handle the technical stuff, the regulations, the paperwork, but I need someone who can connect with clients, who understands what they're going through." It was tempting, really tempting. "What about the vintage store?" "Well, Maria seems pretty cool. Maybe she'd be interested in having a financial security consultant on staff. Help customers who are worried about online shopping scams, that kind of thing." I thought about it. A chance to help people avoid what I'd gone through. A chance to work with Madison as equals instead of rivals. A chance to turn the worst experience of my life into something meaningful. "You know what?" I said. "Let's do it." 6 months later, Rodriguez and Rodriguez Financial Security was officially open for business. Our first client was David Chen's elderly mother, who wanted help protecting herself from future scams. Our office was small, just 2 desks in a shared workspace in Manhattan, but it was ours. I never did get my $28,000 back. The FBI recovered about $1,200 from various accounts, which they sent me with a very official letter of apology. But I'd gained something more valuable: a purpose, a business, and a relationship with my sister that was built on respect instead of competition. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting your money back. Sometimes it's making sure the people who hurt you can never hurt anyone else again. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, getting scammed out of your life savings turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. But I still eat a lot of ramen. Some things never change. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.